Folks, sometimes you have to ask yourself the important questions in life, like, what the hell am I doing? And which pitcher in a baseball movie has the actual best mechanics? And because I'm a lot more qualified to answer the second question than the first one, that's the one we're going to focus on. Given my background of being a pitcher and my copious amount of free time given to me by the rehab from my elbow surgery, I figured that I had enough time to go back and watch a bunch of baseball movies and honestly figure out who was the best. And there are a lot of movies about baseball, and the athletic prowess of the actors in them varies quite a bit. I understand that you have to weigh how much of a part comes down to your ability to look the part on the field versus your actual ability to act, and I get which one of those is more important. Otherwise, Noah Syndergaard would probably have more acting credits than his half-second-long cameo in Game of Thrones. Anyway, I was looking up one of the spring training scenes from Major League, and I saw this comment underneath the video. It said that pitchers generally thought Charlie Sheen had the best motion in any baseball movie, and allegedly on set he would reach the high 80s when he threw as hard as he could. And to be fair, Charlie Sheen's motion is pretty respectable. I don't know if he's throwing 88, but that's what got me thinking about who actually has the best delivery in a baseball movie. And to make this a little more fair, I had to set out some criteria. Rule number 1, the actor has to be someone that I would at least know from something else that they've done. I really don't want to sit here and critique guys who were picked for the parts because they played and looked the part of a baseball player. That's not really as fun. What I want to look at here is actors who were put onto the mound because of the role that they were in. Rule 2, the character has to be on screen long enough for me to actually be able to tell if they know what they're doing or not. Otherwise, I can't really break anything down or analyze it if there's minimal video of them actually throwing in the movie. And so after these 2 rules, there's really only 5 movies that I was willing to watch that I had to work with.
Look, I promise that one of these days I'm gonna get everything that I need to get into a video the first time I record it, but today isn't that day. So, there is actually a third rule here that I just didn't really say. I'm not including actors who are portraying real people in true stories. It adds another level of an impossible standard because I can look at the mechanics of the person that they are portraying and compare them to that, and they are really never going to be able to perfectly mimic that. That is too pedantic, even for me. So, with those 3 rules, I was left with 5 movies.
And before we get going, I do want to say I understand these are actors and not athletes. I don't expect any of them to realistically look like they're throwing 95 miles an hour, or even 90 for that matter, because that's simply not going to happen, and I know that. Really, I'm judging these guys more off of if it looks like they fudged the truth when the director called and asked if they'd ever played baseball. This is in no way a judgment on them or their ability to act. I am not qualified to judge that. It's just a little baseball-adjacent fun. Also, I am just ranking the actors and how they look throwing a baseball. This is just strictly a ranking of how the actors did, not a ranking of the movies. And this is just movies. I'm not doing TV shows for this. The movies on their own were more than enough material to work through. Honestly, TV might have been easier. I could have just watched one episode. This was dumb. Before we get to the actual list, I have 3 honorable mentions and 1 dishonorable mention for movies that did not quite meet the conditions I set out. We'll start with the dishonorable mention, which is Summer Catch. Freddie Prinze Jr. plays Ryan Dunn, and obviously Freddie is recognizable from other things he's done, but in Summer Catch, you never really get a proper shot of him throwing. There's very few, they're cut a lot, which is so you can't tell that the motion is not great. And the only shots we get of a ball actually being delivered, you can't see the pitcher's face, and I have reasons to believe that in those shots it is simply not Freddie Prinze Jr. For example, this very cool overhead shot that they do is awesome from a cinematography standpoint, and just a cool thing at a baseball mechanics standpoint, to be honest with you. But it also very clearly shows that this guy is not Freddie Prinze Jr. He appears to be a lot more mobile, and the pitching motion looks a lot more powerful than anything we see when we can see Freddie Prinze Jr.'s actual face. Maybe he could just let loose a little more when he didn't have to, act for the cameras because his face was on screen, but more likely I think that it's a stand-in. So that's our dishonorable mention. Now onto the 3 honorable ones, starting with Trouble with the Curve, a movie that I once complained about for 25 minutes straight. Rigo Sanchez is portrayed by Jay Galloway. This is by far his most significant acting role. In fact, he went into the audition with no professional acting experience at all and won the part. And motion looks fine, it's good, maybe a little stiff, but overall pretty solid. He played baseball in high school, so it's not surprising that his motion looks good here. If you want to hear about my plethora of other issues with the movie Trouble with the Curve, you can do that there. Right? Yeah, there. In Moneyball, Casey Bond plays Chad Bradford and does a really impressive job replicating Bradford's motion, which is no small feat. It's a unique motion to say the least. However, this is also his largest role. He has a lot of baseball playing experience. He played in college, played even a little bit of pro ball with the Giants, though he was an outfielder, not a pitcher. Either way, it's still really impressive what he did in Moneyball, but unfortunately I just can't count it. The movie 61 features a number of pitchers that are honestly all pretty good, but one in particular is Hoyt Wilhelm, and he's portrayed by Tom Candiotti. And it's a really, really brilliant choice. Hoyt Wilhelm was a legendary knuckleball pitcher, and they picked Tom Candiotti to portray him, and Candiotti was also a knuckleball pitcher in the big leagues for 15 years. It is basically Candiotti's only acting role, and he does a great job. It's, a perfect part for him.
Just give me a ball.
I do have one slight issue with the scene where Tom Candiotti is featured. They show Candiotti throwing a knuckleball, and then it transitions into a computer-generated image of a baseball to make it easier to show how a knuckleball doesn't spin and how it dances around. And it's perfectly fine, and it gets the idea across. However, the confusing part for me is they went through the effort and had the attention to detail to get Tom Candiotti to play the part. Why not have Candiotti throw some knuckleballs and use a clip of that slowed down to show how the ball doesn't spin and dances around? I know it's possible because I have a video of me throwing a knuckleball. I tried it last offseason just to see if I could still do it. You know he could do it. That's why he's there playing that part, because he fits the bill so perfectly. And I guess maybe they tried it and didn't really like the result. In a movie that is so realistic the whole way through, it would have been so much cooler if they had just taken advantage of the very, very cool practical effect that they had on hand. Anyway, that's enough complaining. Into the actual list. Occupying the very bottom spot on this list is a movie that I watched many, many times as a kid and have not watched a bunch since. It's Angels in the Outfield. And I learned 2 things while I was researching Angels in the Outfield for this video. One, it's a remake. I legitimately didn't know this until a couple of days ago. It's apparently a remake of a 1951 film of the same name that was about the Pirates, since the Angels wouldn't exist for another 10 years. And secondly, the cast is actually kind of incredible when you consider it. It's like a lower grade baseball version of Outsiders. Many of the actors weren't stars yet, but it does include Adrian Brody, Matthew McConaughey, along with Danny Glover, Christopher Lloyd, and of course Joseph Gordon-Levitt. However, the actor in question here is Tony Danza, who portrays Angels pitcher Mel Clark. And to put it kindly, Danza is just stiff. Like, really stiff. Like, his shoulder has no external rotation, or layback as it's more commonly called. And this is generally a pretty big indicator of if someone played baseball or not, especially when they were younger. Quick nerd break. So, if you throw a lot at a young age, your body actually makes a physical adaptation to allow for more external rotation, which is this range of motion. It is pretty clear here that Tony Danza does not have this, or maybe if he did, he lost it during his time as a boxer, which is what he was prior to being an actor. But overall, it just makes Danza's motion look very, very awkward at times, especially when it's shown in slow motion, which happens several times throughout the movie. This movie also, unfortunately, doesn't really stand up that well on a rewatch. It didn't age terribly well. I don't want to go off on a tangent about it, so I'm going to limit myself to this one thing. At the end of the movie, Christopher Lloyd, who is the leader of all of the actual angels that are helping the California Angels, he goes to a child. He tells him that they can't help in the championship game, even though they've been helping all the way up, and also that Mel Clark, the pitcher on the mound during the game, is going to die in 6 months because of lung cancer. And then he just leaves. This is a Disney movie. Next, we have a movie that is not really about a pitcher, but technically it is about a pitcher. And if that's not enough of a hint, it is The Natural. Actually, let me put on my Wilford Brimley shirt to talk about this movie. There we go. So, obviously The Natural is more about Roy Hobbs as a hitter, but he does start off as a promising pitcher. And because of this, the movie shows us 2 really great scenes that include Robert Redford pitching. And to be fair, Robert Redford is not bad. His arm moves pretty fluidly and like he's played before, which is pretty impressive considering one of the 2 scenes that we get of him pitching, he is wearing a shirt and tie. In a later scene where Roy throws a pitch during practice as everyone is coming off the field, just sort of for fun, we get a really, really nice continuous slow motion shot of Redford delivering the baseball. And overall, it is actually not bad at all. His front leg kind of collapses and that makes the whole thing look a little bit funky, but again, overall, it's pretty good. The scene goes on just a little bit too long here and you can get an idea that the ball's not coming out as fast as they make it look when they cut, but overall it's pretty solid, but there are a few that are better. Okay, back to my other shirt. Much better. Now we come to what is probably my favorite baseball movie that I mention here, Bull Durham. Tim Robbins plays Ebby Calvin LaLoosh, better known as
Nuke. Homie Nuke.
And it always throws me off a little bit that the same actor portrays Nuke LaLoosh and also Andy Dufresne in Shawshank Redemption. They're just such different characters that even though I know Tim Robbins plays both of them, that it feels like a revelation every time I remember it. And I would say that Tim Robbins' motion here is overall fine, but the really impressive part is how he is able to change it as the plot requires it. There's a point in the movie where he is told to throw like he's not looking at the plate and like he's breathing out of his eyelids. And watching the way that his motion changes when this is going on makes me believe that that's what he's trying to do. And that in and of itself is pretty impressive. The motion itself varies between looking somewhat serviceable and a little bit awkward in different scenes. This one here looks pretty good, but this one looks a little bit funky. In some scenes, Tim Robbins seems to block himself off in a weird way with his glove, and it just looks a little bit weird to me. In an interview, Tim Robbins said that he played baseball and felt pretty confident playing a baseball player, but he was a third baseman and hadn't been a pitcher, so he had to learn the mechanics of pitching for the movie. And so I think that probably explains why sometimes it looks pretty good, and at the same time it looks a little bit awkward. We're going to follow up one Kevin Costner baseball movie with another one, but this time he is the pitcher in For the Love of the Game. Costner plays Billy Chappell, who is a pitcher for the Tigers, and the movie occurs during his last start before retiring. While this one might not be held in as high of regard as Costner's other baseball movies, Bull Durham and Field of Dreams, it is still a good baseball movie, and it's largely anchored by Costner's ability to convincingly play a pitcher. This is in large part, of course, because Costner seems to be a huge baseball fan. He has 5 movies that in some form relate to baseball, 3 of which include him being a player. He was very close friends with legendary University of Texas baseball coach Augie Garrido, and Augie Garrido actually plays the Yankees manager in For the Love of the Game. Costner allegedly tried to walk onto the baseball team early at his time at Cal State Fullerton, but did not make it. I could not find anything that confirms this. It's just in his Wikipedia article, so they can't put anything on Wikipedia that isn't true, as we all know. Given all of this, it's not surprising that Costner can play a pretty convincing pitcher. His motion is not anything spectacular, but overall it's pretty consistent and it's pretty respectable. It's actually this play in particular that is the most impressive for me. Chappell making a sliding play off the mound to field a bunt and throwing the runner out at first. It's a pretty difficult play to make in reality. It's pretty impressive when that happens on an actual baseball field. and Costner looks pretty athletic doing it in this scene. I understand there's the possibility that it's not actually Kevin Costner doing it, but his face is shown in the replay, and though it is a bit grainy, it looks enough like Costner that I am convinced that it probably is. Either way, in most of the other scenes in the movie, his pitching motion is pretty convincing, if maybe a little bit low effort at times. But overall, it's very, very good. Unfortunately, it is not quite the best, because that guy's comment was right. The best pitching motion that I could find in a movie was Charlie Sheen playing Wild Thing Rick Vaughn. Charlie Sheen notably talked about it a lot in interviews, that he really was trying to throw as hard as he could so it would look more realistic that he was this flame-throwing pitcher in the movie. In fact, he admitted that he went so far as to actually take steroids to try to throw harder. And apparently it worked. He went from throwing 79 on set to throwing 85. And his motion looks really good on the mound. There's clearly enough continuous shots of him pitching that aren't cut in a bunch of different ways to disguise the fact that his motion didn't look realistic. Also, apparently in a lot of the scenes they had actually moved the plate up to 50 feet so that it would look like Sheen was throwing even harder than he was. And if my math checks out, throwing 85 miles an hour from 50 feet is the rough equivalent of throwing 102 miles an hour from 60 feet. You can check the math yourself, but I'm relatively confident I did this right. I was a physics major. Math is one of the few things I was good at. Charlie Sheen said he played baseball in high school and was a shortstop and a pitcher, so honestly, it's not all that surprising that when he took the mound all those years later as Rick Vaughn, he looked pretty natural. And of course, kids, this teaches us the very important lesson that people on the internet are always right. You should believe everything you see on the internet.